He was one of the richest men in the city, yet powerless when it came to his own son. Born with a disability, the boy had spent his life in the shadows, never daring to step onto a dance floor. But then, one night, a black waitress did something no one else ever had. She placed his son's hand in hers and let him lead. The room froze. Whispers began. And in that single step, the billionaire father saw more than just a dance. He saw the truth about dignity, prejudice, and love. But why did that moment change everything? It was supposed to be just another night. The city's most exclusive ballroom glowed with golden chandeliers, the air filled with the scent of champagne and polished marble. At the center of it all sat Richard Langston, a man whose name carried weight in every corner of the financial world. Billionaire, power broker, philanthropist. Yet behind the tailored suit and the polite smiles, there was a shadow that even his wealth couldn't erase. A shadow shaped like his only son. Michael had been born with a disability that kept him bound to a chair, watching the world move while he stayed still. For years, Richard shielded him from curious stares and cruel whispers, hiding him away in private schools, guarded estates, and quiet rooms. To outsiders, it looked like protection. To Michael, it often felt like a prison. He wanted nothing more than to be seen, to belong, to live without being pitied. But in Richard's world of glittering social circles, difference was something politely ignored, never embraced. That night, the gala was meant to celebrate one of Richard's newest ventures. Music swirled, couples twirled across the dance floor, and cameras flashed as the city's elite mingled. Richard played his part as the gracious host, but every so often, his eyes drifted to the corner where Michael sat alone. The boy's gaze followed the dancers, his fingers twitching slightly, as if tracing the rhythm he could never join. Richard's chest tightened, half with pride, half with guilt. He could buy his son the finest tutors, the most advanced doctors, even entire foundations in his name. But he couldn't give him the one thing Michael seemed to want most: freedom. In that same hall, working quietly in the shadows, was someone Richard barely noticed. Her name was Lena, a young black waitress hired through a catering agency. She carried trays of champagne with steady hands, careful not to draw attention. In places like this, she had learned to become invisible. Guests rarely saw her face, only the glass she held, the napkin she placed, the quiet "yes, sir," or "thank you, ma'am." It was safer that way, because in halls filled with wealth and power, someone like Lena wasn't meant to be more than a servant passing through. But Lena saw what others didn't. She noticed the boy in the corner, the way his eyes longed for the dance floor, the way his father glanced at him with a mixture of pride and shame. She recognized that look, because she'd felt it before, the sting of being different in a world that only valued sameness. She knew the weight of invisibility. Richard didn't yet realize it, but his life was about to intersect with hers in a way that would shatter everything he thought he knew about dignity, race, and love. In a single choice, one quiet act, Lena would step out of the invisibility she had been forced into and place herself at the very center of a storm no one saw coming. And it would begin not with words, not with grand speeches, but with the smallest gesture, one hand reaching for another across the divide of power, privilege, and prejudice. Because sometimes the moments that change us forever don't announce themselves with thunder. They arrive quietly, hidden in plain sight. Richard Langston had built a world where nothing seemed impossible. Billionaire, investor, and philanthropist, his name was engraved on hospital wings and etched across university halls. To the public, he was untouchable, a man who had it all. But behind the iron gates of his estate, there was a truth money couldn't polish away. His only son, Michael, was born with a disability that made even the simplest steps impossible. For Richard, business had always been a battlefield he could win. Numbers bent to his will, competitors fell in his shadow, and every setback could be solved with money. But fatherhood was different. Michael's wheelchair was a constant reminder of a fight Richard couldn't buy his way through. No matter how many specialists he hired or foundations he funded, the sight of his son's longing eyes when others played, ran, or danced pierced through the armor of his success. Michael was 15 now, bright and gentle, with a smile that seemed to carry both hope and heartbreak. He loved music, especially the rhythm of the waltz, the kind of dance that spun the world into elegance. He would watch videos, tapping his fingers on the armrest of his chair, as though his body was begging to follow. But he never asked his father if he could join the parties, the galas, the dazzling evenings that defined Richard's life. He already knew the answer. On the night it all began, the ballroom gleamed brighter than usual. Chandeliers dripped gold light across the marble floor, and violins filled the air with notes that swayed like silk. Guests in gowns and tuxedos glided across the polished floor, spinning in perfect circles as photographers snapped their flawless images. It was Richard's night, a celebration of a new business triumph, another jewel in his crown. He greeted investors with handshakes, smiled for cameras, and raised his glass like the perfect host. Yet, even in triumph, his gaze kept drifting to the edge of the room. There, half hidden near a column, Michael sat in his chair. His face glowed as he watched the dancers, his eyes following every step with quiet hunger. To anyone else, he might have looked like just another observer, but to Richard, it was a mirror of the one thing he could never give: normalcy. And while the wealthy swirled in conversation, someone else moved unnoticed among them. Lena, a black waitress working the gala, carried trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres with careful grace. To the guests, she was invisible, just another uniform, another silent presence filling their glasses. But Lena noticed what others ignored. She noticed the boy in the corner, his gaze fixed on the dancers. She noticed the father, powerful and untouchable, watching with a pride laced in guilt. She noticed the silence between them, a silence filled with things neither could say. Lena knew silence. She knew what it was like to be present yet unseen, to carry weight in a world that refused to acknowledge it. Growing up, she had learned how to navigate spaces where she didn't belong, where her skin spoke louder than her voice. And here, in this glittering hall of wealth, she saw the same isolation painted across Michael's face. Neither Richard nor Michael knew it yet, but Lena was about to change everything. The divide between privilege and invisibility was about to collapse, not with a speech, not with confrontation, but with a single, unplanned act, because sometimes history doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it waits quietly at the edge of the dance floor, ready to step into the light. The music soared that night, violins weaving through the air as dancers moved in perfect rhythm. From his chair, Michael's eyes glimmered with both longing and defeat. His fingers tapped nervously, keeping time with the melody, almost as though he was dancing in his mind. Richard, caught between conversations, noticed but looked away. It was easier not to dwell on the things he couldn't change, but Lena noticed. She always noticed. Balancing a tray of crystal glasses, she paused for the briefest second near Michael's corner. He looked up, startled, unused to anyone meeting his gaze so directly. She offered a small, knowing smile, one that didn't pity him, but acknowledged him. It was subtle, fleeting, but in that grand room where everyone looked past him, it meant everything. Minutes later, when her tray was empty, Lena made a choice. She walked back, kneeling slightly so her eyes met his. The band had shifted into a soft waltz, the kind of song Michael loved. And then, without fanfare, without asking permission from anyone else, she extended her hand. The boy hesitated, his breath caught in disbelief. Around them, laughter and chatter swirled, but in that moment, silence pressed in. Slowly, nervously, Michael placed his trembling hand in hers. And then, Lena did something no one else ever had. She guided him forward, not as though he was broken, but as though he belonged. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads turned, whispers sharpened like knives. The sight of a black waitress leading the billionaire's disabled son onto the dance floor was not a scene the city's elite had come to witness. Some looked away in discomfort. Others sneered. One woman muttered under her breath, loud enough for others to hear, "How inappropriate." Richard froze. He had just lifted a glass in toast when he saw it, the image that stopped him cold. His son, smiling wider than he had in years, his hand clutching Lena's, his chair spinning gently as she twirled him in rhythm with the music. It was beautiful. It was pure. And yet, All Richard felt at first was panic. Whispers grew louder. Investors exchanged glances. A man Richard had courted for months shook his head, muttering about standards and spectacle. Cameras lifted, catching the moment in frozen flashes. To them, it wasn't a miracle, it was a scandal. Lena felt the stares burn into her, but she didn't let go. She held Michael's hand firmly, guiding him through the steps in a way that made him laugh, an unguarded, joyful laugh that filled the ballroom louder than the violins. And for the first time in his life, Michael wasn't invisible. But the reaction was swift and brutal. The orchestra faltered, musicians exchanging uneasy glances. A woman in diamonds whispered to Richard, "This is embarrassing. Stop her before it ruins your reputation." Another man chuckled cruelly. A billionaire's heir paraded like that? By her? The word hung heavy. Her? Not Lena. Not a woman with dreams and dignity. Just her. Just a black waitress daring to touch what society told her she shouldn't. Richard's face burned. For a moment, he almost raised a hand to end it, to restore order, to protect the image he had spent decades building. The crowd waited for it, expecting it. Some even smirked, eager to see the servant scolded, put back in her place. But then he saw Michael's face. His son's eyes were lit with a fire Richard had never seen before. It wasn't pity. It wasn't resignation. It was life. The kind of life he thought Michael could never taste. Richard's heart pounded. He was torn between two worlds: the polished, ruthless society that defined his empire, and the raw, undeniable truth playing out before him. And in that tension, the whispers grew sharper, uglier. Some voices turned openly cruel, disgraceful. "This will be tomorrow's headline. What's next? She'll be dining with us?" The air thickened, heavy with judgment. Lena kept spinning Michael, ignoring the poison around her, but even she felt the weight pressing closer. Each step was a rebellion, each laugh from Michael a strike against the unspoken rules of the room. And then the moment cracked. A man stepped forward, one of Richard's oldest investors, his face twisted with fury. He pointed directly at Lena and hissed, "Enough. She doesn't belong here. Get her off that floor now." The music screeched to a halt. The dancers froze. All eyes snapped to Richard. Would he protect his empire or his son's happiness? The ballroom, moments ago alive with music, now pulsed with a suffocating silence. Michael's chair sat at the center of it all, his laughter still echoing faintly, as if it didn't yet realize the music had died. Lena stood behind him, her hand still resting on his, steady but trembling under the weight of 100 eyes. And then the voice came again, sharper, louder, unforgiving. "She doesn't belong here." The words cut through the air like glass, shattering. The investor's finger stayed fixed on Lena, his face twisted with disgust, not just at her presence, but at her audacity. Murmurs surged through the crowd like waves, whispers turning into open condemnation. A black waitress, with his son. Michael's smile faltered. Confusion flickered in his eyes, the joy of the dance evaporating as he registered the hostility pressing in from every side. For a boy who had spent his life on the margins, this wasn't new, but it hurt more because, for one fleeting moment, he had believed he belonged. Lena felt every stare pierce her skin. She wanted to stand tall, but years of knowing what it meant to be out of place weighed on her shoulders. She wasn't surprised by the cruelty, it was a language she had heard all her life. But tonight, it wasn't just her. The venom was directed at the boy who had dared to feel alive in her hands. Richard's chest constricted as if the entire room was closing in on him. He could hear snippets around him: embarrassment, disgrace, headline tomorrow. Every word was a threat, not just to his reputation, but to the empire he had spent decades building. And yet, when his gaze fell back on Michael, something inside him cracked wide open. His son looked smaller than ever, shrinking under the weight of their scorn, his hands gripping his chair like anchors. And then came the breaking point. A woman in a pearl necklace stepped forward, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Mr. Langston, it's time you controlled this situation. She's humiliating your family." Lena's cheeks burned. Michael's head dropped. The crowd leaned in, waiting, hungry to see her shamed, to see her forced back into invisibility. For them, it wasn't about a dance anymore. It was about putting people back in their place. Richard's pulse roared in his ears. His whole life, he had believed power meant control, controlling outcomes, controlling perceptions, controlling the story. But standing there, watching his son's joy erased by cruelty, he realized he had been wrong. True power wasn't about control. It was about courage. The silence stretched unbearable. Every second he hesitated made Lena smaller, Michael weaker, the crowd bolder. Cameras hovered, waiting to immortalize his response. His empire, his son, his conscience, everything collided in that one impossible choice. And then, something happened that no one expected. Michael, his voice trembling but loud enough to be heard, whispered, "Don't let them take this away." It wasn't a plea, it was a command. A son's defiance breaking through years of silence. Richard's knees nearly buckled. In that moment, all the billion-dollar deals, all the polished speeches, all the towering achievements meant nothing. What mattered was that his son was finally asking to be seen not as a burden, not as a symbol, but as a boy who had found joy in the arms of someone they wanted erased. He turned to the crowd, his voice low but unyielding. "She stays." Gasps erupted. The investor's face twisted in outrage. The pearl-necklaced woman sputtered. But Richard's words cut through them all. "She stays. And so does he." The orchestra sat frozen, bows suspended in midair. For the first time, Richard wasn't the host catering to their expectations. He was a father drawing a line, but the crowd didn't yield so easily. Some jeered openly, others stormed out, muttering about ruined partnerships and disgrace. The investor sneered, "You'll regret this, Langston. You'll lose everything." Richard's hand tightened on Michael's shoulder. Lena's grip steadied on the boy's hand, and as the storm of anger swirled around them, Richard made his choice clear, not with wealth, not with speeches, but by standing beside the two people the room wanted most to erase. The cameras flashed, the whispers sharpened, and the world was about to decide whether to punish him for it or follow his lead. The gala did not end in applause. It ended in fractured silence, broken only by hurried footsteps and doors slamming shut as guests abandoned the ballroom. The chandeliers still glittered, but the room felt darker, emptied of its elegance. The powerful men and women who once sought Richard's favor now whispered about betrayal, about scandal, about deals that would never be signed. But at the center of the storm, three figures remained: Michael, still glowing with the memory of a dance; Lena, standing tall despite the sting of humiliation; and Richard, realizing for the first time that everything he had built meant nothing if he couldn't defend the dignity of the people he loved. The following days were relentless. Headlines screamed about a billionaire's disgrace, tabloids framed Lena as an opportunist, and investors pulled out of deals that had taken years to negotiate. Richard's empire trembled, but he refused to release a statement that would distance himself from Lena or from his son's moment of joy. Instead, he spoke publicly for the first time about what really happened. He described not a scandal, but a revelation, a reminder that the worth of a person isn't measured by wealth, status, or perception, but by their humanity. And still, the backlash came. People mocked him, others threatened boycotts. Some dismissed it as a staged performance. But in corners of the country far from chandeliers and marble floors, people saw something different. They saw a waitress who had dared to lift a boy into the light. They saw a young man whose laughter had cut through cruelty. They saw a father who chose courage over comfort and truth over reputation. For Lena, life didn't suddenly become easy. Racism doesn't vanish with one act of defiance. She still faced whispers, suspicion, and doors slammed in her face. But she also found new strength, knowing that her small act had shattered a silence no one else dared to break. She hadn't just given Michael a dance, she had given him a voice. And Michael, he never forgot that night. The memory of spinning across the floor, of hearing the music not just in his ears but in his bones, became a turning point. No longer content to watch from the margins, he demanded more from his life. He spoke up more. He laughed louder. And every time he remembered the cruelty of the crowd, He also remembered the warmth of Lena's hand, steady and unyielding against the tide. As for Richard, the empire he once guarded like a fortress changed forever. He lost deals, he lost friends, but he gained something greater: clarity. For years, he had mistaken power for safety, believing wealth could protect his son from the ugliness of the world. That night taught him the truth. Silence in the face of injustice is complicity, and protection without dignity is no protection at all. And beyond the ballroom, the story took on a life of its own. People shared the image of Lena guiding Michael, their laughter captured in blurry photos before the music stopped. Some mocked it, others defended it, but for many, it became a symbol, a reminder of the walls society builds around race, disability, and class, and the courage it takes to tear them down, even for a moment, because this story was never just about one boy, one waitress, or one billionaire. It was about every person who has ever been told they don't belong. It was about the cruelty of silence and the cost of courage. It was about how racism doesn't always shout, it whispers and stares, in judgment, in the quiet expectation that some people should remain unseen. The dance ended that night, but the question it raised still lingers: how many more moments like this must we witness before dignity, equality, and love are no longer acts of rebellion, but simply the way we live? One dance exposed more than a room full of whispers. It revealed how far we still have to go against prejudice. But what do you think? Was this a scandal, or the start of real change? Share your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button if this story moved you, and don't forget to subscribe so more voices like this one are never silenced.